Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and professional wrestling personalities about their lives in and outside of the ring, as well as doing acts of charity work, community service, volunteering, and spreading positivity. We're always about the positive vibes here on the show. And with me right now, I've got a very special guest. He has worked for numerous promotions over the years, talking about the WWE, WCW, AWA, currently the owner of Joe Cazana Promotions, part of the National Wrestling Alliance. I'm pleased to welcome the one, the only, Joe Cazana to the show.
Hey, man,
welcome, Joe, to Wrestling with Heart. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Thanks, man. Thank you for having me. So I'll be out of character for this one.
Yes. All right. So let's talk about your childhood and upbringing. I know you come from a legendary family of wrestlers and wrestling personnel. What can you tell me about your childhood and upbringing and your first memories of professional wrestling?
Have you ever seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding?
Yes, long time ago.
That's my life. That is true. I am Greek, and my family is Greek. My wedding was Greek. But no, to go back in history just a little bit. We go back almost 100 years as far as wrestling and or promoting in the state of Tennessee, and it's crazy. But my childhood coming up, it was different. We were that weird family that wrestled. You know, as kids, you go to school and you take little things in for show and tell, right?
Mm-hmm.
I used to take wrestlers to show and tell. I mean, that's my childhood, and it was interesting. I met a lot of great people, a lot of superstars, a lot of legends. I first saw Andre the Giant when I was 7 years old, and when I broke in the business, I got to wrestle for the WWF at Thompson Bowling Arena. Andre was on the card, and he remembered the family, and he actually remembered me as just this little kid, from back then. So, yeah, I mean, we were that weird family.
Growing up a fan of wrestling, it's always cool to hear about how these men and women get their start, learning about the business. A lot of them growing up watching it as fans. And for you getting to actually be there, live and in person, meeting these legends, talking about Andre the Giant. I mean, that's a thrill of a lifetime.
I mean, it was from Andre to the champions of the time. I mean, Lou Thez, Dory Funk Jr., Terry Funk. Matter of fact, I just saw Dory Funk a few months ago down in Tampa at one of our tapings, and it was great catching up with him after all these years. But the legends used to come through Knoxville. I mean, Knoxville, Tennessee was the hotbed of professional wrestling from around 1958 to 1979, 1980, right before the big split between Fuller and all the wrestlers that went on to the All-Star group. So, yeah, I mean, the legends came through. I got to meet them all. A matter of fact, a quick story. Back then, kayfabe was huge, back in those days. And I can remember my grandfather always having a Christmas party at the house, and it was always two Christmas parties, one for the baby faces, one for the heels, because the press was always there. That's the one thing I'll say that my granddad had, albeit his television program was what it was. I mean, he had a live show, and then he went to a tape show. But when it came to the Knoxville News Sentinel or the Knoxville Journal, he had a lot of friends that worked there and owned the places, and they would always come to these parties. And wrestling back then, people took it very, very seriously, and good guys and bad guys did not interact, and that's the way it was back then. So he would have dual parties. So that was always interesting. But yeah, man, it's something growing up in a wrestling family. It's something to have the background that I have. It's I used to think it was a curse, but as I got older, it wasn't. So, but yeah, man, being from Knoxville and having those roots in Knoxville, Tennessee, it doesn't get any better.
You know, it's interesting. The Tennessee territory is huge. When you talk
Mhm.
about, all the cities, you have Knoxville, you got Nashville, you got Memphis, you got Chattanooga, even in Kentucky and in Alabama.
Mhm.
It just stretches out. Being, someone that's very interested in the history of wrestling, knowing about where all your favorites come from and where they got their start, it's just so fascinating. It really is.
It is, and back in those days, the state of Tennessee itself had 5 territories. 5. Right now we have 2, and it's us and it's KFW Crossfire. We're getting ready to take the state of Tennessee over by storm. So, I don't know who listens to your podcast. I don't know who listens to me, but I've said it a million times. If you don't want to get run over, stay out of our way, because we are getting ready to take over the state of Tennessee. The National Wrestling Alliance, Crossfire, Joe Cazana Promotions, the state's going to become ours, and we're going to close the borders, and it's going to be like it was back in the old days. And we're gonna be the ones that dominate the scene, and that's as a friend of mine once said, that's not a prediction; it's a bona fide spoiler. Thank you, Paulie Dangerously, for that line.
You know, when you're watching these athletes, put their lives on the line, uh, tell me about some of the people that you just idolize, you really wanted to be like in the ring with, or just want to be like when you're going out there competing.
Well, like I said, back in the day, my champion was Ric Flair, and I got to know Ric Flair. I got to meet Ric Flair. I got to hang out with Ric Flair. And they say never meet your heroes. No, man, meeting Ric Flair was great. I always tried to emulate what he did to an extent, as far as my bumping ability that I had back then and the things that I did. Uh, I never was able to actually wrestle, Flair, but I did tag with him a few times. One time in particular, Hazard, Kentucky, of all places. I mean, that was the time the NWA ran an A squad and a B squad. And we were in Kentucky. Flair was the world champion. He was on the show, and we had a major snowstorm. And we were there, and there were probably about 7 of us there, and that was it. And I was able to tag with him that night against the Rock and Roll Express, who I made a living in the ring with. And that was right after Flair got the big gold championship belt. And we did single matches. We did a battle royal. Then we did tag matches. And I can remember going out and I was the only one he'd let have that belt. So I had big gold in my hands, and I actually had a picture made with it. So Rick walked back to the dressing room after the match. He said, "Well, how'd it look?" And I said, "Well, how'd what look?" He said, "How'd the belt look? I know you wore it." I said, "You're right, I did, man. It looked great." So, uh, but meeting Ric Flair, hanging out with Ric Flair, uh, it was an honor to be around Flair. Bobby Eaton was another one, and I was thrilled to death to always hang around Bobby Eaton. People are going to laugh at this one. Another real good friend of mine in this business that a lot of people either hate him or love him is Jim Cornette. But Jimmy and I go back a long, long way. And I remember one night in Marietta, Georgia, I just got through wrestling, and Jimmy comes up and he says, "Joe," he said, "your punches are the you know what." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Well, we're going to show you how to throw a punch." So he and Bobby showed me how to throw a punch, and nobody at the time threw a punch like Bobby Eaton. So my punches emulate what Jim and Bobby had taught me back then. So yeah, these are the guys that I hung with. Tim Horner was another one that I was really close with. Mark Kyle, I don't know if you remember Killer Kyle from Smoky Mountain, but we hung together, we rode together, we traveled together, and God rest his soul, Doug Furness was another one. So, I had a lot of friends in the business, probably 5 or 6 really good ones. Right now, to be perfectly honest with you, one of my best friends in this business is a gentleman by the name of Aaron Stevens. And I've learned so much from Aaron Stevens. And if you remember him, he's the one that brought the Mizdow to life. He's the one that brought Damian Sandow to life. But Aaron Stevens is a true gentleman. He is a really good friend of mine. He has been so instrumental in the Country Gentleman and what we're doing. And it's just been a pleasure to work with him. He and I basically spent the summer together. So I mean, we were together almost at least 2 weeks out of the month all summer long. So yeah, but he's another one, really good friend of mine.
See, I think that's so cool in the wrestling business is the camaraderie. You get to be with people, 365, 24/7,
Yeah.
just, getting to know all these people and eating with them and going to the hotels and, mingling and all these really cool things, getting a
Right.
chance
Well,
to
nowadays it's more like
socialize.
a job, though. I mean, back then we were on the road 7 days a week. We were either in the air or on the ground doing something, and the camaraderie was there, and the times were different. I'm one of the very few people left in the NWA right now that even remembers the territory system. I mean, Austin Idol is one that remembers it. Dr. Tom Pritchard is another one that remembers it. There might be a couple of more that I'm leaving out, but those are the two that come to mind. And we talk a lot about the territory era, and I reference the fact a lot that the territory system is what made me who I am, and it gave me an opportunity to do more than just go to TBS, and lay down, But I made a great living out of putting these guys over, and I tell the story all the time. I always had a job. I never went without a job. When Ric Flair or Dusty or Ole or some of these guys would get fired, hey, guess what? I was still coming to work the next day. So uh, I'm proud of what I did back in those days, and I'm proud of what we're doing now, because the NWA now, to me, it's right here. And I swear I consider WWE right here, because WWE to me at this point in my career is not what it once was. It's To me, it's all about your entertainment, and I'm not about entertaining. I am a professional wrestler, and I work for a professional wrestling company. And Billy Corgan will say the same thing. We are a professional wrestling company. Do we entertain? Sure, we do, but we are not entertainers. So tell Trevor Murdoch he's an entertainer. So I wouldn't.
Well, let's talk about, how you got started in the business
Sure.
as a wrestler. It's very demanding, intense, the training process. It's hard, it's tough. When I've
Yeah.
talked to people on the show about uh, you know, being put through the ringer, so to speak, it's very grueling. What was your experience like learning how to wrestle?
Well, learning how to wrestle was one thing, but breaking in like I did, I broke in when I was in high school, and I was on Ron Fuller's ring crew with Continental Championship Wrestling, and it was tough. There was 3 of us, that were the ring crew, and that's how I broke in. And when my grandfather passed away, and the wrestlers came to the funeral home, it was Ron that said, "Hey, let me put you in touch with the local trainer. Your granddad actually trained him." And I was like, I don't have any desire to wrestle. I didn't want to wrestle.
Hmm.
I mean, I just wanted to do what I was doing. But he persisted, and I became, a wrestler. I trained with a fellow by the name of Rick Connors, who was probably as tough as any pine knot that's in a tree anywhere. And it was pure hell, because the first month, maybe even the first 6 weeks, I never saw a wrestling ring. I saw a grassy backyard with rocks and dirt and stumps and everything else. And that's how we learned how to take bumps. We learned how to do fireman carries. We learned how to take body slams in Rick's backyard. And it was finally we got into a wrestling ring, and you want to talk about these beautiful rings of today. This ring that I trained in was a 16 by 16 ring. It had vinyl canvas. It had a vinyl uh, uh, apron. It had plastic ring ropes. Now, have you ever seen plastic ring ropes? Well, these
No.
are plastic ring ropes. And in the middle, back in those days, there used to be a spring in the middle of the smaller rings to give it the bounce. This ring had a tree stump in the middle of it. It wasn't a bounce. You hit a tree stump. And that's how we broke in. And it was 4 months of, like I said, pure hell. And I guess it was about the last week or so, we had gone from 20 students down to 2. And it was me and an old friend of mine named Tom Pittner. And the last lesson that we learned was how to get hit in the head with a steel chair. Now, you think a steel chair, they pull those? They don't pull them. You got to know how to get hit with them. You got to know where to hit with them. Because if you don't, it will concuss you. Now, getting hit the right way, it jars the fire out of you, believe me, but it's not going to kill you. But we learned how to do that, and we both took about 10 or 12 chair shots apiece in an afternoon. So that was my experience training. There was a lot of throwing up. There was a lot of blood. There was a lot of dislocated fingers, twisted knees, the typical stuff. And back then, these guys didn't want you in the business, so they'd do everything in the world they could to push you out. The one thing I had going for me was the fact that I was from a wrestling family, and that my grandfather had a reputation. And the reputation that my grandfather had, not only was he a tough guy and just a guy that he was a shooter, my granddad was, but he was also fair. He took care of the talent. He took care of the boys. He did, he took care of the people that took care of him, if that makes sense. So that was my training. It was 4 months of pure, just, oh, it was horrible. It was the worst thing that I've ever done, as far as physicality. You don't learn how to be a professional wrestler in training. I'm sorry. These people can say what they want to. These people that are at the performance center and places like that can talk about how these guys are training them to wrestle. They're not training you to wrestle. They're training you to survive. And that's how it was with us. He trained us to survive. Where I learned how to wrestle was having matches. That's how I learned how to wrestle, by wrestling some of the guys, of course, that were older than me, that beat the absolute snot out of me. And that's how I learned how to be a professional wrestler.
Seems like you got your reps in, you got your experience, you kept doing it, kept doing it, kept doing it. You had mentioned you didn't want to be a wrestler at
No,
first.
not at
Why?
all. Because it was like this. I've been around it so much, and up until the time I was about 8, 9 years old, I thought it was 100% real. When I found out it wasn't, it broke my heart. It did. That's how much I loved wrestling. And growing up, we'd wrestle in the backyard. We'd have our little matches. We'd have fun with it. But that's about as far as it went. I never gave it a second thought. I was in it for, my whole life. I had no desire to be in it. I couldn't see myself being my age now doing it. But hey, guy, here I am. And it's not all. Wrestling's not always good to people. You see the glitch, you see the glamour, and you just, and that's what you see from the television standpoint. Get back in the back and see how it really is. As a kid coming up and being back in the back and hearing the stories and the yelling and the cussing and the fussing and the fighting and the just knives being pulled, guns being pulled, and just that kind of stuff. I didn't want that. I did not want that. I wasn't big enough to play college football. Once I played high school football, did all that, and once that was over with, you know, my dad put me to work at the post office, and then like I said, I started working on Ron Fuller's ring crew, and I didn't have an issue putting the rings up and stuff like that. That didn't bother me. I just didn't want to wrestle. And Ron was just persistent, and that's, the rest is history, I guess, as they say.
What was the one thing that kept you motivated, kept you going after all that? Because you were training for, it seemed like you said 4 months.
4 months. Yeah, 4 months. Um, honestly, after a bit, it got to the point to where I was looking forward to going, and I didn't know why, but it was just like you were talking about earlier. It was the camaraderie, because I mean, after being out there for a couple of months, 2.5 months, almost 3 months, and we were dwindling down to where there was nobody in class. Rick finally loosened up a little bit, and became more of a mentor instead of a drill sergeant, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So
Yeah. I mean, you stuck it out, you made it through. Was there any pieces of advice that you got from your trainers that still apply to you today?
not really. I mean, I learn every single day in this business. I don't know everything as much as I let people think that I do, but I don't know everything. The one thing Rick always told me was to always be prepared, always protect yourself. That's the one thing that I've always done, is protected myself. My grandfather, he never gave me any advice when it came to wrestling, because he was never there. He passed away before I even had my first match. But one thing I do remember him telling me as a kid growing up, when I was, I guess, maybe a sophomore in high school, maybe a freshman in high school, my grandfather told me to always treat people fairly and to always treat people the way you wanted to be treated. And that's kind of the way I've lived this wrestling life. I want to take care of the talent the same way he did. If I'm going to leave a lasting impression on this business, when I'm dead laying in that casket, I don't want anybody to walk by and say, "Oh, doesn't he look good?" My kids have been instructed to say, "No, he's dead. How good can a dead man look?" But what I want people to say is, "Man, he was fair. He took care of the talent, and he was just a good all around dude." And the most importantly, I want to be known as that guy that took care of the talent. I want to take care of the boys, because I remember what it's like to go out there and bust your rear end, and somebody comes up and hands you a Coke, or gives you a hot dog, or gives you $5, or whatever. I mean, the big money did not come, the first few months I was in the business. Believe me, it didn't. Even the first year and a half I was in the business, I think the most money I ever made was like $20. So I mean, it's a lot more like a handshake and a Coke and a hot dog is what you're going to get. And when I got my first paycheck from Jim Crockett Promotions, it was incredible. Even when I got my first paycheck from Mid South Wrestling with Lawler, that was big, and that was we all pretty much made $400 a week back then, and that was not good considering the travel we had to do. When you hear the stories about, staying in the car, eating tuna, or staying at that, cut rate motel, that's true. I mean, that's a true story, man. So, but that's how I want to be. If I'm going to leave a memory, I just want to be known as the guy I want to be known as the fair guy, you know?
You've worked for numerous companies, as we
Mhm.
said before,
Sure.
lots of wrestling promotions. Um, Over that period of time, who were some of your favorite opponents that you got to work with over the course of your career?
I've worked them all, man. I mean, if I sat here and told you that working the Steiners wasn't fun, it was. A lot of people didn't like working with them. Uh, I understand why, but when I worked with Rick and Scott, it was nothing but fun. Rick Steiner used to make it fun all the time. I mean, he was a cut up, and Scott was still green, and he listened, and he ended up being great. Scott did. People didn't like working with the Road Warriors. Mike and Joe were, um, God rest their souls, man, but God, they were so good, and they were so talented, and they were so ahead of their time, but the Road Warriors were terrific. I thoroughly enjoyed working with them. I mean, like I said, I've just worked so many of them. I don't want to leave anybody out at all because I've had good matches with a lot of people. I mean, Stan Hansen, bless his heart. I mean, I worked with Stan for quite a bit, and the very first night I ever worked with him, he said, "Joe, it's nothing personal, but when you take the lariat, go down on your own." He said, "I can't see without my glasses." And sure enough, he can't. So by the end of that month, I learned how to fall before he touched me, because he'd take your head off with it. Tracy Smothers and Steve Armstrong, the Wild Eyed Southern Boys at the time, I worked with them for 8 straight months, every single night. And that was so much fun. We did so much. To this day, Steve is still alive. He'll tell you it was me that got him their jobs in WCW or the NWA at the time. Tracy told that story all the time. Working with Ricky and Robert, probably I worked with them more than I worked with anybody. And whether it be singles or whether it be tag matches, we always tore the house down. Ricky and I tore the house down one night in McMinnville, Tennessee, on an NWA show, and we were on the loop. And the very next night we were in Nashville, and we were told, "Hey guys, you ought to the semi-main event. Nobody could follow what you did last night." Okay, so we were the semi-main event for the rest of the month. So I mean, that was before Robert came back, but I'd be hard pressed to say that Ricky and Robert I worked with them more than any of them. And I probably had some of the best matches I ever had with the R&R. And those guys were fun. They were easy, very talented. My grandfather knew Paul Morton, who's Ricky's dad. Of course, I was with Ricky. My kids are working with Kerry. I watched Kerry and my youngest, KC, have a match that neither one of them should have had, for the time they've been in this business. Last year at the Tennessee Valley Fair that we did, and they tore the house down. I mean, honestly, when you've got Tom Latimer and Silas Mason in the main event for the National Heavyweight Championship, and Kerry Morton and KC Cazana steal the show, and listen, Latimer and Silas had a barn burner of a match, but Kerry and KC stole it. And Ricky and I were at the ring watching it the whole time, and we were just in amazement. But yeah, Ricky and Robert probably, and with the Southern Boys being right behind them. But like I said, Steiners, Road Warriors, those guys right there, nobody wanted to work with them. I had no issues with them, none at all.
Those are definitely some good ones for sure. I want to talk about your promotion,
Okay.
Joe Cazana Promotions, how you got started, creating your own promotion, and then eventually having that partnership with the National Wrestling Alliance.
Sure.
What made you want to start your own promotion?
It was a fluke. I mean, honestly, it was a fluke. 2009, I was asked if I ever thought about running a show, and I not really. I mean, I had a different career path at that point. And in 2009, I did a benefit show for the local high school football team down here in Decatur, Tennessee, and it went well. And so I would do sporadic stuff at that point. My promotion back then didn't even have a name. So I mean, it was just hey, live professional wrestling. But it was fun. But in 2016. I was asked to do a benefit for the high school football team. Well, my son, KC, was getting ready to become a freshman. And I knew the high school football coach, good dude, head coach was. And I said, okay, let's do this. So on that show, I actually wrestled on that show, and I had Jim Cornette as my manager. Ricky and Robert were on that show. The Heat Seekers were on that show. So, I mean, it was a big, big show, and we sold out the high school here. And I said, this is pretty cool. And this, like I said, this was 2016, and my promotion still didn't have a name. So I guess you fast forward a little bit. Izzy Slapowitz, I don't know if you even remember that name, but he was a major big-time player back in the late 70s and 80s. He was a manager managed the Devil's Duo, Doug Bynes and Jeff Sword, for Randy Savage's father's promotion in Kentucky. So he approached me and Ronnie Garvin about doing, I guess, a show. It was called International All-Star Championship Wrestling. So I had a wrestling school at the time, and we filmed the shows at my wrestling school. And Ronnie and I did color and play-by-play. So he did his thing, and he really didn't, he didn't stick with it that long. It lasted probably 22 episodes is about all it lasted. And it was fun, but it just wasn't what it needed to be. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? You can do this. So in 2018, I decided I was going to not wrestle anymore. I was just, I'd had a match with, it was me and AJ against Kerry and Ricky at the Greene County Fair. Well, I popped my hamstring and I thought, this is it, and I'm done. And I said, I'm never going to do it again. So in 2018, I decided this is going to be my final match. So let's do this. So it was AJ that actually said, well, what are you going to call the thing? And I said, well, I don't know, man. He said, just call it Joe Cazana Promotions. Well, actually, he said Joe Cazana Productions because of my grandfather was John Cazana Productions. I said, well, let's just call it Promotions, what it is. So that's kind of how the name came about. And I wrestled that show and that was it. But that's where, JCP, Joe Cazana Promotions was born.
And you'd mentioned, your sons now wrestle too.
Right. Yeah. The Country Gentlemen, NWA United States Tag Team Champions. And I'm lucky enough to manage them. So again, like I said, this was Aaron Stevens' brainchild as far as this particular set of Country Gentlemen. AJ had his partner a couple of years ago. He'll remain, nameless at this point because it was a bad breakup. Let's just put it that way. And it was basically the very next day at TV in Nashville where KC had his debut. And I've never seen a debut like that in my life. Never. And I've been in this business for 40 years and I've never seen a debut like that. And that's when the new Country Gentlemen, or actually version 2 is what I called them. They called them 2.0, but now they're just the Country Gentlemen. And like I said, this was Aaron's brainchild as far as the way we're doing it now. And I'm lucky enough to manage, as we say now, we do things by the book. And I don't know if you've seen what we're doing, but I carry an NWA rule book with me everywhere I go. And it's from 1974. It was my grandfather's. And that's what I do. And I quote the rules and if somebody breaks them, then I'll call them out on it. Now,
I love the old school continuity. You're taking things from back then and you're putting it in the modern era. That's really fascinating and amazing.
But I've said it 1,000 times. Everything that we do now, whether it's in ring or out of ring, it's if we do something from back then, it's so old, it's new again. These kids haven't seen this. The fans haven't seen what we did back then. And the things that we did back then, you bring it mainstream today. Are we going to do flips and all this dippity do off the ropes? No, we're not going to do all that. We can. I can't, not anymore, but they can do it. But we are a professional wrestling company. That's what we do. That's the NWA. Can we fly? Yes. But we wrestle. And that's the one thing that we do that these other companies don't. There's not another company out there that does what we do. That includes the WWE, AEW, MLW, TNA, all points in between. As far as I'm concerned, we're the best company in the world. There's nobody any better. And I just don't say that because I'm on your podcast. I don't say it when I go on the NWA's podcast just to be saying it. I believe it right here in my heart because I am NWA. I was born into the NWA and I'm going to die in the NWA. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here as long as Billy will have me. And it's a great company to be with. But the whole transition from NWA or I'm sorry, from JCP to NWA JCP, I'd met Billy at the Always Ready pay-per-view, and I helped them promote that show. And he was talking to me after the show about territories. Do you think a territory could work again? I said, the only way a territory is ever going to work again is if it's done the way we did it back then. But we got to put, at this point, 2022 twist on it. And he kind of took it in for what it was worth. So we had a couple other conversations through the months about it. Last summer, he did a tour. Smashing Pumpkins did a tour where the wrestlers went on tour with them. I was lucky enough to go on tour with them. And the last show in Charlotte, he came out and hung out with us for about an hour or so, and we were talking territories. And that was when I pretty much knew that, hey, look, he's getting ready to do this thing. And EC3 can say whatever he wants to. We were the first territory, and I tell him that all the time. I say, three, we were the first territory. And I said, the only reason you are noted as the first one is because you got a date quicker than I did. So, but last year we had a big, huge show in Cofield, Tennessee, and we put 800-900 people out there in the gym that night. And I had it was the biggest show that I'd ever done. I've never done a show that big as far as talent goes. I mean, from world champions to just mega stars. And Billy was there, Joe Galley was there, and we were introduced as a territory. And that was, coming. It's a full circle moment for us.
Yeah, it definitely seems that the NWA has really taken off. It's done incredible. I've checked out the product and the promotions. You guys have really good stuff on there, so I'm looking forward to seeing where the future is headed. And wanted to talk more about Casey and AJ. Tell me about when they wanted to have the idea of wrestling. What was your response?
You're an idiot. That was it. I mean, I said, you're an idiot. I said, why? And AJ's background, AJ, he was a D1 college football player. I mean, he played at the University of Tennessee, and he's an athlete. And I guess at the time, he just felt that that's what he wanted to try to do. And, if he's going to I tried to train him, before he actually started training, and he wasn't going to listen to me any more than a stick outside. A stick outside would probably listen to me more than he would. But he ended up going to Tom's school at JPWA, and I mean the rest speaks for itself as to what he's done. It's taken him 3 years to get to where he is right now. I couldn't train him. I tried, and he ended up going to JPWA. I guess, like I said, 3 years isn't a long, long time, and to reach where he is now, and he's been a contracted NWA performer wrestler for a year and a half now. And then, of course, my youngest, KC, I don't know what got into him. He he played college football as well, and he played at Tusculum University, and he was there for 4 years, and he played there. And he told me, he said, Dad, he said, I'm not going to play the COVID year. He said, I'm so tired. They had a season where they played in the spring and the fall, so that wore him out. So he decided, he said, well, how about if I wrestle? I said, well, why? And he told me, I said, well, JPWA. I mean, I can't show you anything. So he did the same thing. And I'm proud to say that about a week ago, he signed his very first contract with the NWA. So now both the kids are contracted. They're the U.S. Tag Team Champions. Sky's the limit for them. So, I mean, I couldn't discourage them. I mean, I did it. I'm still in the business. I mean, I couldn't discourage them any more than I did. And if they continued to do, talk about it, and they went and they did it, and now they're doing what they're doing, then they made the right decision. I mean, Casey's 22 years old, and he can pretty much do whatever he wants to. He's still a young man. AJ's 30. So
they're carrying on the legacy, of the Cazana generation, of that whole, family of wrestlers and wrestling, royalty, you
Yeah,
know.
they are, and they're gonna do it proud. I hope they stay with the NWA. I mean, forever. I mean, I hope the NWA grows and grows beyond what anybody could possibly think it could do. But if they choose to move on to WWE or AEW, then so be it. That's I guess nowadays the WWE is the pinnacle of everything. Nobody will ever be the number one company besides them. I mean, I feel like that. I think that we can overtake AEW as number two soon. I mean, that's how strong I am about the NWA. Nobody's ever going to touch WWE. They got too much money behind them.
Let's talk about, the stuff that outside of the squared circle, outside of wrestling.
Sure.
Outside of wrestling, the NWA and Joe Cazana Promotions is involved in so many charity efforts
Oh my
and
God.
has
Yeah.
helped out with so much in the uh, in the Tennessee area, the Knoxville area. Let's talk about some of the stuff that you have done. Um, Both, yourself and the company have done for people in your community. With kinds
Sure.
of, charity things or charity work have you done to help out in your community?
You know, down here where I am, I'm in between Knoxville and Chattanooga. So you know, I do stuff down in Chattanooga, Cleveland, Athens, here in Decatur. I do stuff up in Knoxville and what have you. Um, a lot of the shows that I do, I would say probably the bulk of them are usually benefit type shows, and I shouldn't really say benefit, but more fundraising for sports teams or something to that effect. That's kind of the way we operate as sponsors. They'll pay for the show. Um, Pretty much, you can't do one of these things for free. A pro wrestling show, it's impossible to do for free. It really truly is. Certain benefit shows you probably can, and I've been on a bunch of them, and I've done a bunch of them for families that have been in need, or maybe somebody had passed away and they couldn't afford the funeral expenses, and we put a show together to be able to do something like that. But most of the things that I do now encompass basically high school football programs. Uh, Believe it or not, we've done benefits for cheerleaders, soccer teams, baseball teams, just the various sports teams in the area. When we did the territory show in Knoxville, a portion of the gate went straight to the Carnes High School football program just to help them get new uniforms and that kind of thing. And that's kind of what we do, and that's kind of the reputation that we have at NWAJCP is, you got a sports program, whether it's, football, basketball, underwater basket weaving. If you want to try to do something, we'll be more than happy to come in and help out. 90% of these people, they do have sponsors. They've got booster clubs, for example, that will step in and say, okay, we'll incur the cost of this. What can you bring in for this? And I always go above and beyond. So I mean, it whatever show I bring, it's going to be a top flight show. But it's basically, like I said, we do stuff for the sport teams, or and we've done things for the JCs. We're in Athens or down in Cleveland. Um, the Masonic Lodge, we've done stuff, with them, believe it or not. But I mean, it's just that's kind of the extent of our fundraising. If I, like I said, if I do benefit shows and we do freebie type shows, it's to take care of um, flood victims, like we did, up in Kingsport here not too long ago. Or if somebody passes away, like I said, and they can't pay for their funeral, or they need help with that, we try to step in. And if they ask us, or even if I know the people, we try to go in and we try to help them do stuff like that. But that's the extent of it, which is probably, I mean, that's, to me, that's, I don't know if that's above and beyond what anybody does or what, but I mean, we just try to have, that reputation again of being, a caring company, especially the NWA. I mean, the NWA, they take care of the community. I mean, we went into Tampa a few weeks ago, and the money basically went to the hurricane victims. I mean, they got hammered back to back with hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
We were supposed to
Hard.
go in there. Yeah, we were supposed to go to Sarasota for Samhain too, and it ended up getting destroyed. So we moved it up to Tampa, and then the Sarasota people, we tried to take care of them as far as the gate and all that stuff. So I mean, that's kind of what we do there. I mean, and we'll go out. The wrestlers will go out, and they'll go to the. I think that NWA and Walmart have a pretty good relationship together, and the wrestlers will go to the Walmarts, and I mean and that's not really what you'd consider fundraising, but it's community relations, and that kind of thing, and that's kind of what we do with the NWA. But that fundraising is a big thing that we do here. We try to we just try to make money for these sport teams or cheerleaders or JCs or nowadays it's so hard for these people to generate any kind of funds, and if we can bring in a pro wrestling show and they can make $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever, then that's great. One of the shows we did down here for the football program, they literally made $9,000. So I mean it's possible, it's doable. That's what we do here for like fundraising, and sports is really big in this part of the country, and sports is really big where we are in relation to the location of Knoxville and Chattanooga, and we're close to Crossville. We're close to the Alabama state line. We're close to the Georgia state line. So sports is huge, and there's 1,000 sports programs, and all of them need money. So that's kind of where we try to help.
Was there like a moment that was just so heartwarming, being able to give back to a certain cause, or anything that you would like to share?
Anytime that we've done anything when it comes to destruction, that's always been big for me. The Tampa tapings, the stuff that we did in here, we've had tornadoes come through here. We've had just terrible weather coming through here, especially in the last few years. And anytime that I can help somebody like that, that's the best thing in the world. One of the biggest fundraisers I ever did, and I did it as a wrestler a lot of years ago. It was Make-A-Wish, the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a few of those, nowhere near John Cena's record, but I did a few of those. And one of the ones that we did was we did a show for this couple of these kids, and they were in wheelchairs, and they just love professional wrestling. And not only did we do the show for them at the arena, but we also went back to their house with them. And that right there was probably the biggest thing that these kids took away from it. It wasn't the fact that, Joe Cazana and Sting and guys like that are standing here in my living room. We were just regular people at that point, and we were just trying to do something to help them. So yeah, the Make-A-Wish thing was really big back then too, the way it is now. But it's always best for me. It's always been better to do something like that, the Make-A-Wish, or when somebody does have some destruction out there, or you're trying to help somebody just recover from their husband dying, and he's the only source of an income, and what am I going to do, and that kind of thing. It makes you feel good to help them out. Makes you feel good to help them out and them not know it's you. That's it's kind of like the GoFundMe's. I know that people get carried away with those, but I also know the last couple that I've actually donated to, they needed it. And again, both of them were in the wrestling business. One of them's house burnt to the ground, and the other one lost a lot to a fire. So that was, that a lot. Like I said, a lot of those GoFundmes is garbage, and you and I both know that. But if you kind of know the situation, the background, it makes you feel good when you try to help them out, whether it's $1 or $1,000. It's just really nice. But it's always been the people who's lost something, or the Make-the-Wish Foundation and things like that. That's always been the best for me.
Why do you feel passionate about giving back to your community?
Because I would like to think that if something happened to me or my family, they'd do the same. What's the golden rule? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
believe it or not, I know that one. But no, I learned that from my granddad. You take care of your people. Um, I, I, I'm, I am not that same guy that you see on television. Let's just put it that way. The guy you see on television is I'm portraying somebody. I'm a cross between John Dutton, J.R. Ewing, and Boss Hogg, all rolled into one. But Joe Cazana sitting here talking to you I'm just a regular guy, and I just want people to in this day and age. I just want people to survive. I mean, in this day and age, it's. I feel so sorry for the kids. I mean, I've never been glad to be 60 years old, but I am. I'm glad to be this old because I don't have to live to see what this world's going to become in 30 years or 40 years. They do, and I'm scared. I'm scared for them. But that's just me. But it's just I want to take care of these people, and again, one day they may have to take care of me. So I don't want those people to say, "Oh, that Joe Cazana was a jerk." Yeah, he was a jerk in the ring, but outside the ring, he's a pretty nice guy. That's it.
Yeah. It's all about being good to other people and
Right.
treating people the way you would want to be treated. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. But I tell the kids all the time, and this is something that I've always lived by: be careful who you step on your way up that ladder, because I'll tell you now, you're going to hit them on your way back down. You got to be very, very careful, and that's why I live like I live.
Yes. It's good words of wisdom for sure.
Yep, I think
Well,
so.
Joe, this has been wonderful getting the chance to speak with you. Just want to say thank you for coming on to the show. It means a lot to me and to my
Well,
listeners
thanks
and
for having me. I
viewers
appreciate it.
that are watching this on YouTube. Yes, absolutely. Where can people find more about you on social media, find more about the NWA and Joe
You know,
Cazana
people
Promotions?
always ask that social media stuff, and I'm a 60-year-old guy who would still be comfortable using a rotary telephone. So, but I mean, everything's the same. I'm Cazana Joe on X. I'm Joe Cazana on Instagram. Joe Cazana Promotions on Instagram as well. Joe Cazana Fritz on Facebook. Joe Cazana NWA Joe Cazana Promotions on Facebook as well. You punch in Joe Cazana, you can pretty much find me anywhere you want to find me.
Well, Joe, thanks again, and you're more than welcome to come back.
Hey, man, just invite me back anytime. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Take
Yeah, man.
care.
You do the same.
This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.